Hello everyone, welcome to another coding session. Today we'll be covering Asyncio error handling. Okay, so we had this code earlier. I had covered it in one of my previous videos. We'll try to go through it, introduce some errors, and see how do you handle errors in Asyncio. Okay, let's get started. So I'm importing all the packages here, and basically the problem remains the same. I have a Hacker News post. I want to collect that post, and then for that particular post I want to go and collect the comments from that post, right? And we'll do that continuously in a loop, so that for every post we get the top five posts, and for each of those we calculate the number of comments for the five posts. Okay, so this code was, I'd gone through this earlier. I pulled the description. I'll put the URL of that video in the description. Okay, so I have a URL template from where I fetch the post, and then for a particular post, I get the comment from this URL, and then I get all the top posts from this URL. All right, and then I define an exception class called boom exception. This is custom exception, right? And then I have this URL fetcher class. In this, what I do is for this method, fetch method, I introduce this exception. The idea is I want to show you how an exception, what happens when exception occurs, how does asyncio handle it, and how do we handle it in the code, right? So I'm introducing a fake exception. If my counter becomes greater than maximum number of fetches, I've just defined maximum number of fetches as 5. If this, then I raise a boom exception. Otherwise, there is another exception that I raise whenever there's a random integer I generate. If it's equal to 0, I raise this exception. Okay, so this exception happens within the fetch method. All right, then I have couple of functions here, or coroutines. If there's a async, you call it a coroutine. So post number of comment, this function fetches for each post the number of comments. Okay, so you get the post first, right? Then you look at the number of kids of those posts, right? So you loop through it, and then you you recursively call this function. It'll give you the number of comments for each of the child comments recursively, right? And then I do gather and then get result, right? So that function, so this get comments of top for is function. It basically call the other function, right? So here first I get the top five so here I get the top five posts, right? So top stories URL, I get a response, and then I pick up the five top posts, and for each of them I call the function here, post number of comments function, which was defined here. All right, now this function is this coroutine. Basically it runs in a for loop. Sorry, it like a infinite loop while true. It every time after every 5 seconds, so I sleep for 5 seconds. Every 5 seconds it goes and calls this function, right? And then it happens in an infinite loop, right? So this we had covered earlier. So here I'm creating a task, asyncio task, and then adding callback to it, right? What does a callback do? Callback basically gets the result from the result function. So when I do result, basically it calls and gets the final fetch URL, this function. Okay. So all of this was covered, but yeah, just to give you a brief background on what the code is doing. So poll stop stories for function or coroutine runs forever in a basically in this we run continuously in a while true loop, right? And then I have a main function which calls basically this poll stories function, and then I run this. Okay, so let's run this and see what happens. So I have okay, Python. All right. So you see, I get a boom exception, which is my custom exception. But you'll notice one thing: my Python interpreter doesn't crash, right? So in a normal use case scenario, whenever there's an exception, the Python interpreter crashes and then the whole thing terminates. But you see here it doesn't crash. So this is typical. Why does that happen? Because if you see, whenever I create, so and also you can see that exception happens in callback post here, right? So basically on line number 116. So if I go to line number 116, this is so when I create a task, there's no exception, but it runs in the background. But whenever I try to get the result of that task, right, by calling this function, so this function basically calls the fetch function, and then that is where the so here is where when the callback runs and then I try to get the result of the task, the exception happens. Also, the important thing is whenever you create a task and then since tasks run in the background and if there's an exception, it your main thread doesn't get stopped, and that is why you're seeing the terminal is still running, right? Even now it's running. Because the reason is it all happens in the background. So if there is an exception, but you still have to handle that exception, right? It's not okay that even though the program itself, the whole program doesn't crash, but there is an exception being raised, and it in the background might be affecting your other processes or things, right? So yeah, but overall, that is what is happening. So it typically when you try to get the task result, the exception happens. Now uh, let's see how do you handle an exception, right, in asyncio. Okay, so there is so in this code we'll see how am I handling the exception. The same code, everything is the same. I raised two exception. One is a generic exception Python and one is a custom exception. Now typically whenever you're trying to handle exception, if there is an await, right, you just try to put it within the try except block. So if you're calling if you're calling a coroutine or a function which is an async and you think there might be an exception, so we know that fetcher dot func this function this method is basically raising exception. So what I do is I put that in the try except block, and then I know the exception can be of two types, right? Boom exception. So I put all of that, then I handle the exception basically logging or whatever, and then I re-raise it. So this is fine for now. Otherwise you can have custom logic on what you want to do if there's an exception. So rule number one is whenever there's an exception, I think you put it within try. If there's an await function, then you put it within try and except. Okay, right? The other thing is whenever if you're using gather, you can put gather also within try and except block, right? So basically, and then so this gather with internally, if any of the child task throws an exception, it will get bubbled up here, and then you can handle it. So again, I have put it in a try except block and then handling it, right? I'm logging it and then re-raising it. So you're basically I'm just logging all of this and re-raising it. Okay, that's the second part, right? So even gather you can put within try except, but the final piece is so again here wherever I'm calling this fetch function, I put that within try except block, right? Now the another I think the most important thing is which I wanted to show you is you whenever you call gather you can put return you have this option of return exception is equal to true. So now what it'll do is even if the child task throws an exception, it will not throw an error. That exception will come out as in the result. So now I'm doing what I'm doing is I'm going through the results, right, and checking if the result variable is an exception type booms, and then I do this thing. If it's an exception, if it's a boom exception, I do this. If it's a generic exception, I do this. Otherwise, I do this, right? So this gives you an option of handling the exception without what the type of exception is and how do you handle it, right? So that's what I do with a gather there. Now coming to the create task again, right? So whenever we know that this line, whenever you get the result, it throws an exception. So again, I can put that within the try except block, right? So I put it within try except block, do and what also I'm doing is I have a errors list. I whatever exceptions I get, I put that in an errors list, and so I know okay, there is it gives you an option of handling it later, right? Since I don't have gather here, it's whenever I create a task, you can handle exception in the callback that you get, right? Because whenever you try to get the result, that is where it will throw exception. I can't put here, right? Because this part is not throwing an exception. If I put with the try except here, nothing's going to happen. It's only within the callback when I try to get the result, the exception happens. So I put that within exception. Handling block, add the exception to the errors list, append it here, right? And do whatever I want with it. Cool. So I've handled all of that here. Let's run this and see what happens. So I'll kill the first one. Python. Right. So cool. So okay. I know. See. So basically now it's running fine. I know exceptions are being exception is happening, but I'm handling them properly. Right. So you don't see the it's crashing and all that stack trace of the exception being printed on the terminal. Right. All right, so this is what I have for today. We'll be covering, I'll cover a few more exceptional handling techniques and cover more in depth Asyncio in the future videos. So please like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. Thank you. See you again.